So Dr. Birch, when you're ready, we can start.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our workshop on applying for a graduate student research and travel grant. I am Dr. Katrina Birch. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychological Sciences, and I am the current chair of the Graduate Student Research Grant Committee on the Graduate Council. And I'm joined by Dr. Kudali, and I'll let Dr. Kudali introduce himself.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Birch. My name is Ranjit Kudali. I serve as the Associate Provost for Research and Graduate Education. The Graduate Student Research Grant is administered by the Graduate School, and we are blessed to work closely with the Graduate Council members of a subcommittee called the Graduate Council Research Committee. Apart from Dr. Birch, who is the chair of this important university-wide committee, we have Dr. Lily Juhadar, who is unable to join with us, but we are pleased to welcome Dr. Marla Zubel. Dr. Zubel, would you like to introduce yourself and hand over to Dr. Birch?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Zubel. I'm in the English department and film program, and I'm on this committee that will be reviewing grant proposals that we receive. So I look forward to seeing some submissions pretty soon.
Dr. Birch, it's all yours.
Okay, well, I will get started then. Okay, so I've provided an agenda here for our workshop today. There are also QR codes embedded on each slide, and the code here links to the Graduate School Student Research and Travel Grants page, where there is information and application links, as well as example budget and budget justifications to help guide your efforts as you are preparing your materials. So we're going to go over the research grant guidelines, as well as the deadlines for application for the fall and spring semesters, how to apply, some budget guidance, some tips, tricks, and helpful hints, a few details, the review and selection process, and how to access funds and complete your funding paperwork. And so with that, we will go and get into kind of the meat of this. All right, so the graduate school at WKU provides students the opportunity to contribute to their field through research and creative activities. And it is the role of the Graduate Council Research Committee, or the Graduate Student Research Grant Committee, I think we go by both names, to review the student proposals and recommend funding to the Graduate Council. Once the Graduate Council votes on approval of funding, then the graduate school works to give you your funding. And we'll go over that process in more detail as we go through the workshop. So to be considered, students complete a basic grant request application form, which is found on the website. Again, on the bottom of each slide is a QR code that links to that website. So you can scan it with your phones and pull up the website and documentation that is on that website. You also will complete with your application some additional supporting documentation, depending on if you are applying for a research and travel grant or if you're just applying to receive travel funds. And there are some differences and nuances with each of those that we've hoped are clarified more so now than in previous years to ease the application process. So you are strongly encouraged to consult with your research mentors in completing those materials, and in particular with the research grants portion, you do need to have a letter of support from your research mentor. So some application deadlines, we've determined that for this fall semester, the application due date will be October 11th. And then for spring semester, the application due date will be February 7th. That is when all of your materials are due. Importantly, and again, we'll go over this in future slides, but you do need for research and for when you're applying for research funds or research and travel funds, you need to have your department chair's approval, as well as your dean or associate dean's approval as well. And so you want to make sure that those folks receive the materials with enough advance notice to provide signatures before you are ready then to submit your full application packet. So let's go over how to apply.
I have
So,
a question.
yes.
Have students been informed who they are supposed to submit to in terms of deans or associate deans, or are they just, how do they find that out?
So I know that for Ogden, the materials go to our associate dean for research, which is Dr. Kate Webb. It does not typically go to the dean, and she communicates that around the time of the graduate student research grant applications, and I'm not sure how it's communicated in other colleges.
So it's not listed anywhere for the students who they submit it to. Do they send it to department heads and then department heads send it to the right person, or?
So I know how it works in Ogden, and that process is very clear. We have, and you can see here on number 1, 4 signatures are required: the student, the advisor, the department head, and the college dean. But it has always been the case that the associate dean for research in Ogden communicates who is the signatory at the college level, but it does state on the application that the signatures are required.
So Dr. Rediford, the department head usually comes to an informed decision. There are proven practices in each colleges that may depend on who the designee in the dean's office is.
Okay, thank you.
But if there is any follow-up clarity required, we'll be glad to provide as well. If there is any confusion with change of leadership and department heads, I'd be glad to send an email, Dr. Rediford, so there is less confusion and an application is not pending in the dean's office and delaying the submission of the grant. So your question is really a good one.
Yes, so if you haven't received communication about, as a student, about who to contact if you are applying for research funds, I encourage you to speak to your research mentor, who may then want to talk to the department head and determine who it is the designee for signing at the college level to ensure the satisfactory submission of materials. And like Dr. Kudali said, there could be college-specific differences in who the designees are. All right, so all materials should be submitted to this email address, gsresearchgrant@wku.edu. The graduate school does a really great job of compiling the materials for the research grant committee to review. Part of the required materials is the research application form. Again, 4 signatures are required: the student, the advisor, the department head, and the designee or the college dean. So they can be signed digitally, electronically, or with ink. But again, you do want to ensure that you give your department head typically and your college dean or designee at the college level enough time to review and sign your application. So while the application is due October 11th, that's not when you're going to want to be asking for signatures. So you also have to prepare a formal budget form, and we have a budget form as well as examples of how to fill out the budget, as well as example budget justifications. I will say that in reviewing applications, typically we as a committee have sometimes a lot of questions around the budget items, and in particular, whether or not students have provided a justification for each budget line item. And so it is really important to provide a justification for each budget line item that you are requesting. For students requesting research or I should say research and travel funds, right? The maximum amount is $2,000. For travel only, the maximum amount is $1,000, and the graduate school has increased the amount that students can request over their time in their graduate programs to a total of $3,000. And that information is now on the graduate school webpage. So for students requesting research and travel funds, you want to submit the following required documents with your application: a formal budget form, again, examples on the website, that describes the materials and supplies that you may need to conduct your research, the equipment that you may need, if travel is necessary as part of your research efforts. So here I'm thinking about students who may need to travel to collect data, any participant support or human subjects support for your research efforts, any other kind of items that we haven't clearly outlined here, and then cost sharing if there is cost share available with either your department and or college. It's my understanding that not all departments and colleges offer cost share, but you do need to clearly describe the cost share efforts if indeed your department or college does allow cost share. So the research proposal should include the title of the proposed project, the purpose of your study, the design of your study, and the intended use and possible application of results. We have gotten some questions recently around whether or not there's a standard kind of proposal format. And because of the differences in disciplines and fields, there is not a standard format, because the way in which I may do research as an industrial organizational psychologist is not necessarily the same kind of creative activities that are going to be accomplished by Dr. Zubel in the English department, right? There are definitely going to be field specific nuances and differences. So we do not have a standardized format. Instead, we have some just guidelines for what it is that your proposal should include. And if anybody, yes.
I just wanted to say something about the proposal. For those of you, regardless of your discipline, who are writing these proposals, thinking very much within your discipline makes sense. But keep in mind that you also need to be able to articulate your project for a general audience, an educated general audience, of course. So, but someone who might not be trained in your field, and this is important because we're not a huge committee. We don't represent every single program in the entire university. So part of the task, and this is a good thing for you to learn to do in general, is to really be able to articulate especially the intended use and application results, and the purpose of the study. Getting into the nitty-gritty of the designs of the study, that makes sense that it would be pretty inside baseball. But for B and D, really think about how you can clearly explain your project to someone who is interested, engaged, educated, but might be outside of your discipline.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Zubel. You actually previewed some slides coming up, but I really appreciate jumping in. It is really important to try to avoid jargon. And because Dr. Zubel, Dr. Zuadar, and myself are all from different disciplines, right? we are reading a wide variety of applications, and the more plainly you articulate and explain your research or your creative activities, the better it is that we're going to understand. Yes, thank you. All right, so students, you should also prepare a one-page student bio, either a curriculum vitae or a resume, to include with your application materials. You'll want a statement from both yourself, a written statement, and your advisors certifying that no documents included in the proposal have been plagiarized. This is usually a sentence with a signature, just saying, I certify that all materials or all documents are original and have not been plagiarized, and then you sign. And that signature, again, can be electronic or digital or a handwritten signature. And you'll want a letter of endorsement of the research project or creative activity from your advisor or your research mentor. And then as applicable, you'll want to include a copy of the IRB, the IACUC, or the IBC approval letters as appropriate if your research involves human or animal subjects. Importantly, you do not have to have the IRB approval to apply for funds. You do need IRB approval before you can spend funds, though. So it is perfectly acceptable where it says IRB number to say in process or under review.
Does that IRB need to be submitted to the IRB before October 11th to be considered for that? Or is it just this will be put into the document before funds are used?
So you do not need to have the IRB submitted. If you do and it's under review, I'd encourage you to list it as under review. You can also say that it's in process if you have not submitted yet. Importantly, though, you will need to provide the IRB approval letter before you can spend the funds.
Okay, awesome. Yep.
All right, for students who are requesting only travel funds, there is a maximum of $1,000 that you can request. This is for students who may be traveling to a meeting or a conference to share their research or creative activity efforts, whose research or creative activity efforts have already been completed. So there are a few required pieces of information here. You'll want to submit a formal budget that includes any lodging expenses, how much, how many nights, conference or meeting registration fee, transportation expenses, food and incidentals, as well as cost sharing if indeed your department or your college do cost share. Again, there are some examples on the graduate school webpage on how to fill out this information. Just the same as with the research grants, you'll want to provide a budget justification for each of those line items. Instead of saying, you know, I need a hotel for 3 nights, you'll want to say, you know, I plan on staying at this hotel for 3 nights. Nightly rate is this much. This is how much room tax is to justify the cost of that expenditure. You'll want to also provide presentation details. And note that this is different from when you're requesting research funds. Here, you'll need to only submit an abstract of the research or creative activity that you are presenting. The conference details, name and location, as well as a brief statement describing how participation in that developmental activity supports your future goals. You'll also want to submit a 1-page bio, a CV or resume as appropriate, and a plagiarism statement stating that nothing was plagiarized.
I have a question about that, actually.
Yeah.
Do you have to have been formally accepted to the conference in order to apply for funding? So a lot of conferences in my field take place in early spring, but you submit in September, you don't find out until December, and then the conference takes place in February or March. So I'm just thinking of timeline, for students.
Yes, Dr. Kudali, do you want to speak on this?
Oh, thank you, Dr. Zubel. From my perspective, if students I would encourage students to submit a travel grant even prior to acceptance, and a decision can be pending subject to acceptance of a published work. So we do not want to burden the student because expenses for hotel and flights may increase as we approach the deadline, right? So we would strongly encourage students to apply for a travel grant, anticipating that their creative work or research paper would be accepted. And once we have documentation of that acceptance, the question then becomes, how do we, if a student wants to make prior arrangements for travel, and in case the paper is not accepted, that becomes a challenge, right? So that's where the timing is critical. If there is a grant that is immediate, in November, December, we would encourage the students to apply for this round. But if it is a travel in June, for example, February may be a good deadline. And so we would encourage the students to contact with us, and we can provide guidance as to which call would be more appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
All right. That was an excellent question, Dr. Zubel. Thank you. All right, so we'll turn now to some budget guidance. So there are a number of fundable expenses which you can request some budget for, right? So if you are paying participants or any other assistance that you need to carry out the project, any special materials or equipment that you may need to carry out your project. And here, this is where for, and I'm thinking when reviewing biology and chemistry applications, they're typically requesting different, I'm going to butcher the word, assays. Is that right? That's how I read it. Anyways, so just thinking about through what kinds of materials you may need to conduct your research or creative activities. Any travel, like I said, that is vital to conducting the research or creative activity can be included on that research or research and travel application form. Cost of procuring information, whether or not you need to pay for access to a specialized data set, for example, or any media that's not otherwise available, or any documentation that's not otherwise available. Necessary stationery supplies or postage that may be needed for questionnaires. If indeed you are having paper and pencil kind of questionnaires, funding for registration fees, accommodations, and travel to conferences. That can also include food and incidentals. So these are considered fundable expenses. This list is not exhaustive though. So these are just some kind of general fundable expenses that typically come up on applications, but this is not an all-inclusive list of potential fundable expenses.
I do have a question on like the actual travel cost. Does that include, for example, if you are trying to go from a hotel to wherever you need to be, does that include Uber, any kind of like ride sharing service if you are not taking your car with you?
It's allowable, Garrett. So any expenses, let's say you're going from your home or apartment to the airport, we have a standard mileage rate of 53 cents. And likewise, you take an Uber from, let's say, an airport to your hotel, you need to provide the receipts. We will not reimburse for tips, though. If you give any tips to the drivers, etc., those are non-reimbursable. So,
Okay.
and likewise, expenses to and from hotel, to a library, to a museum, or your field work are all reimbursable.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yes, and when you're filling out your budget form and your justification, it's perfectly acceptable to estimate those costs. Given that we do understand that in the moment or during high traffic times, those costs can increase or potentially decrease as well. So it's perfectly acceptable to estimate those costs. But it is something that would have to be reimbursed at the time of your return. And just like Dr. Kudali said, make sure to keep your receipts. All right. I should ask, are there any other questions at this time?
I had one.
Sure.
Coding is listed there. For the project I have in mind, coding would be necessary. Would we also be like linked with someone that can provide that, or is that all like taken care of after we apply?
So I should ask some specific kind of follow-up questions. Do you mean transcription or coding of what?
Coding for like websites, like apps for the use of the research project, like to collect data.
Okay, so we don't provide guidance on potential services that you specifically would need to conduct your research or to do coding, but we do encourage you to review that with your research mentor or advisor as necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we move on?
Yes, just to clarify, so there is no guideline on how long this proposal should be. Like, you guys aren't saying like, hey, your literature review needs to be under 3 pages or under 2 pages.
That's correct. There are no page limits. Again, there might be field or discipline specific nuances in how it is that your research is described. We encourage you to include as many pages as necessary. But I would say we don't want to review something that's 20 pages, and probably you don't want to write something that's 20 pages either.
Okay, thank you.
And Diamond, that's a great question. And the committee has grappled with this for several years. And we feel that given the breadth of disciplines available in the graduate programs, we expect the research mentor to provide guidance as to the appropriate length. Obviously, we don't want a 10, 20-page introduction like a master's thesis. There should be enough specificity, and at the same time, it should be general enough that a faculty with an English background, a business background, a psychological sciences background can understand the quality of the research proposal and the impact that it will be made. So you need to ensure that there is an appropriate introduction that will indicate the knowledge gaps and why should you pursue the project and the outcomes derived from that study. And so we leave the length to the student and to the faculty advisor. Is there a sweet spot, Dr. Birch or Dr. Zubel? You have seen 5 to 10 pages that captures the essence of what you're looking for from your experiences?
I think from my experiences, the proposals don't tend to be more than around 5 pages. Dr. Zubel, do you?
That sounds right to me.
Yeah.
So Diamond, that would be a good, right? 5 to 7 pages would be a good idea to think about in terms of length. And,
Okay, thank you.
and a font size of 12, you don't want something too small that it's so hard to read as well.
Okay, thank you.
And then just to clarify, that would be for the research proposal for students only requesting travel funds. You only need to submit an abstract. All right, some tips, tricks, and helpful hints. So you want to ensure that you have described the project objectives or the anticipated outcome and deliverables, and you want to do so in general language. You don't want to use jargon. Part of this is almost like scientific communication for a lay audience, because we do have very field specific differences and nuances, and Dr. Zuadar is in the business school, I'm in psych sciences, and Dr. Zubel is in the English department. And so we're very broad kind of array of backgrounds. And so you do want to ensure that you are communicating plainly and for a general audience, and that can be somewhat challenging sometimes. So if you need to ask a friend, or I would say, if I can read it to my mom and she can understand, it's probably general enough. And I've also heard students say, like, if I can explain it to my grandma, it's general enough. So you also want to provide the knowledge gap that the project hopes to bridge. Typically, when we're conducting research, there's some gap that our research is addressing, and so you want to communicate what that gap is. Explain the new knowledge or the contribution expected. This is where you would say, this is what I anticipate, this is what I hope to be contributing, and then discuss the significance and impact clearly. You also want to describe your methodology in a way that a generalist can understand, and this speaks to Dr. Zubel's point that she made earlier. You only want to request funds that are reasonable and critical for the successful completion of the research grant. Sometimes we see some creative budget items, and I will say that when requesting something that seems a little creative, we will ask follow-up questions as to the nature and use of the item or the budget line being requested. And it has been the case that sometimes we will fund, X number of items, but if an item is not, or if an item requested is not fully explained in your budget justification as to why that is needed, then, and if you cannot fully explain why the item is needed, then sometimes those items are not funded. So budget justifications become very important to this process. If applicable, you want to present a plan to present the work in a conference, or if you are planning to publish, you'll want to also describe some of your plans for essentially dissemination of your research or creative activities. Being mindful of the timeline for the proposed project. Budgetary funds have to be expended within a year. So you have 12 months. Grammar check is your friend. Sometimes I will say, when I'm writing something, I'll read it out loud to myself, and I always catch something. And then you'll want to, again, provide that detailed budget justification for each line item. And now we'll discuss some important details. So again, the Grant applications are limited to 2,000 for research or research and travel, and only $1,000 if you're only requesting travel. You have to follow the WKU purchasing policy and the current purchasing exception request process. All materials have to be submitted to GS Research Grant at wku.edu. If your applications are not submitted to the correct email address, the applications will not be considered. You do also have to submit all of your materials on time. Incomplete applications will be returned.
Dr. Bird, just as a clarification, the purge is a carryover from 2020-2021 academic year, so we don't need the PER process, and we have removed that from the website.
All right, graduate students may apply for up to 2 research and 2 travel grants per degree, again, with a $3,000 limit per degree. The Graduate Council Research Committee reviews your proposals, again, typically once in the fall and once in the spring semester. Students who are conducting their research in the summer months should submit the application materials early in the spring semester to allow adequate time for approvals.
Just for clarification on the amount of grants that you can receive on that previous slide, if you apply for a travel and research grant together, does that count as one research and one travel, or is that kind of its own entity?
So it depends. If you're traveling to conduct your research, that would be considered together, right? If you are applying to for research funds and then to travel to present your research findings, that again is also one entity, and you can request up to 3,000 if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Kadali.
That's a great question, Garrett. Let's say, I'm just using an example of some history or English students. They want to go to the Library of Congress, conduct research. So they're performing research, they're looking at some archival records, but travel is also as part of is required for them to access these materials. So if that is the scope, then we would encourage you to apply for the research and travel grants, and you're eligible for up to $2,000 for both research and travel. And let's say you want to go and present, you've gone to conduct research during the winter break, Garrett, and then in the January and February months, for example, you're synthesizing data and you're writing an abstract for a conference, and you would like to go in April for a conference just to present your findings. You could apply for another travel grant this time because you've already collected research materials, and you can present your findings to peers in your discipline. So that would provide clarity to you as to which mechanism you should apply. Does that help, Garrett?
I believe so, yes.
And anytime you have such questions, we strongly encourage you to reach out to the committee. So our goal is to help you submit high quality grants and direct you to the right mechanism so you can maximize the opportunity to obtain these competitive grants.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Sometimes students may want to collaborate. And so if a collaborative project is proposed, then the collaborators should either stay within the announced funding limits and submit a single application, or submit separate applications that clearly describe the contribution made by each individual and the different unique attributes distinguishing one application from the other. So it's not very common to have students collaborate, but it has happened in the past. And so you need to determine whether or not you should submit that application together as a single application, or to submit two separate applications where you clearly define the contribution of each individual within kind of that project scope.
I could say something on this. I think the last funding round, there was a question about a shared application or collaborative, not so much project, but people are traveling to the same conference and rooming together and driving together. And essentially we had to send the application back because they needed to clarify their budgetary lines. So in that case, you know, we might see it more for travel funding than for research projects, but make sure that each of you has indicated that you're going to split that hotel room 50-50 and you're going to split that gas money or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen one application where students were collaborating on the research efforts, but typically it is the case where students might be sharing travel expenses to go to a conference, and then you have to clearly delineate, you know, how the room costs are going to be split or how those travel costs are going to be split if you're driving. And then faculty mentors are encouraged to support applications by submitting a letter of endorsement for the research project. Again, it's kind of one of those components of the application process, and having supportive advisors or research mentors is important for the students in completing their work.
So is that letter required or is it just encouraged?
Yeah, no, it's required for the research grant. So I'm not entirely sure why that bullet point is here. Carryover from a previous PowerPoint. Dr. Kudali, do you have something to say? It is a required component of the application process for those requesting research funds.
How has the committee handled it? I'm trying to put a frame of reference, Dr. Birch, looking at old proposals and looking at website. Does that help the committee members come to an informed decision? And that will let us know whether it is encouraged or a requirement, right?
Yeah, so it's typically the case when students are requesting travel fund, or not travel funds, excuse me, I misspoke. When students are requesting research funds to support a research project, we always see a letter of support from the faculty mentor indicating their support of the student's research, or creative activities. So that is, to me,
it's a requirement, I would say.
A requirement.
Yeah, it would be a requirement, yes.
And just so I can make sure I understand, does the faculty mentor also have to sign off, or just the department head does, like sign the application?
The faculty mentor needs to sign the application as well.
Okay, so they sign and they submit a letter saying they support it, and then just the department head and the dean's representative just sign.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I know some department heads or dean's office designee also reviews the application. So particularly in Ogden College of Science and Engineering, Dr. Kate Webb reviews the materials as well. And I'm not sure how other colleges handle that, but I will say that Dr. Webb does review the materials.
On the current website, it does say that the letter of endorsement is required, part of the required documents.
Mhm.
Yes. From the faculty mentor, right, Dr. Webb?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, and then it's signatures basically from the department heads and the deans.
Yes.
Thank you for the clarification.
So priority will be given to students who have not already received funds prior. So it is the case that you are not limited to just one research grant proposal. Again, you can submit up to 2 research grant proposals or up to 2 travel requests. But priority will be given to students who have not already received funds prior. Proposals should clearly identify the research questions being answered by the proposed work. Expenses incurred prior to receiving the grant are ineligible for reimbursement. I will say that there are exceptions to that. For example, if you have already paid your conference registration fee, there are mechanisms in place to reimburse those costs. Proposals aimed toward publication or presentation at professional meetings are absolutely encouraged. Dissemination of your research and creative activities is an important process, an important developmental activity that we strongly encourage. And then finally, keep in mind that receiving a grant or receiving funds is a rather lengthy process. You do want to give yourself enough time to prepare your materials and submit them to the appropriate places to get signatures and support along the way. All right, so the process involves submitting to the graduate school via email by the posted deadline all of your materials. The student will receive an email notifying them of the decision regarding their application. Once funds have been awarded, the graduate school contacts the accounting office to set up an account for each student. This can take approximately 2 to 3 weeks, and students will not be able to access those funds until the account is set up by the accounting office. After the graduate school receives that account information from the accounting office, the student will be contacted and they will also be sent a letter of approval, an initial contract, and a final contract as well. And I go over each of these on the next slide. So the letter of approval includes the instructions on accessing the funds, the amount awarded, and the expiration date of the account. The initial contract must be submitted prior to receiving your funds. This contract includes the account number. The student and faculty advisor have to sign and date this form, and it should be returned to GS research grant at wku.edu. Once the initial contract is returned to the graduate school, funds will be transferred. When the funds are in place, the student can begin purchasing items from the approved budget. And we encourage you to work with your department administrative assistants as appropriate. So the final contract must be submitted after the research project is completed. You need to fill in the appropriate information and attach an itemized expenditure sheet. The student and faculty advisor, again, have to sign and date that form, and the contract and expenditure sheet should be returned to the graduate school. So once the student has completed their research project or expended all available funds within that 1-year expiration period, they submit a detailed expense sheet. This sheet includes all purchased items, their costs, the total amount, and that may be included with the final report form as well. Again, students submit all documentation to the graduate school at GS Research Grant at wku.edu. I think I have a second slide that has the exact same information. So we'll just go right past that. There we go. All right, so all purchases should be made with the department's procurement card. Again, we strongly encourage you to work with your department's administrative assistant and your faculty mentor as appropriate. Students, faculty advisors, and departments will not be reimbursed for expenses which do not adhere to the proper purchasing procedures. Under no circumstances will transfers or vouchers be approved for reimbursement that are not listed. All right. Okay, and I do have a QR code embedded here for the gift card policy and the cash policy as appropriate. So you may need to pay for travel expenses or services that are approved by the committee. You'll want to complete a travel expense voucher or payment authorization sheet and submit that to the graduate school for approval. Again, please work with your faculty mentors as appropriate and your department office associate or administrative assistants as appropriate. They are your best resources. And if you have any questions, we strongly encourage you to contact us as well, myself, Dr. Zubel, Dr. Kudali. We're here to answer any questions that you may have. And if we don't know the answer, we certainly do our best to find the answer. This is getting into the weeds. I'm not sure, Dr. Kudali, if you wanted to mention anything here.
No, nothing. This one, most of these, the office managers know better than all of us, right? And
Exactly.
the best resource, and on the dean's offices as well. And so these are just for completion. We have included this slide, and the student can always go to the office associates, coordinators, and they do a great job in helping facilitate the transfer of money, reimbursement, etc.
Yes, your office associates are like I said, one of your best resources. They know far more about accessing funds and the transfer of inter-accounts than I do. And trust me, it's okay to ask questions. I ask questions of our office associate all the time. All right, so any additional information that you may need could be available on the graduate school website, but I also strongly encourage you to reach out to us if you have questions, and then we'll also take questions at this time if you have any now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Birch and Dr. Zubel. Students, do you have any questions? This is a great opportunity for you to get clarity from the committee members who will be reviewing these proposals very critically. You can unmute your microphone or post your comments in the chat, depending on your convenience.
I had a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead, Casey.
I just got a little confused as far as the travel versus travel and research. So I'm gonna be traveling to an archive, and like once I get there, the archive, it doesn't cost any money to go inside or to get the materials that I need. So the only like funding I'll be asking for is to cover the travel. So could I just submit like just a travel funding one, or do I have to do research and travel since I'm technically researching?
So that's a great question, Casey. Are you so most of your money will be practically to travel to from Bowling Green to a destination, right? Yes. And you don't, would your research later need some expenses? Would you need some other expenses for completion of this research project?
No,
Any-
it would all be travel.
So there is no materials, supplies, any other associated expenses at all?
No.
Then we would encourage you to apply for the travel. And do you think your expenses would be less than $1,000?
Yes.
Would that be prudent then, you think, Dr. Birch, given that KC will not require any other additional materials and other expenses prior to and after her trip?
So, Casey, you are traveling to conduct your research regardless of whether or not it costs money to actually conduct that research. You're traveling to an archive to engage in your research and creative activity.
Yes.
Yes. So I think that that's
The research and travel may be appropriate, right? And then you could use the findings to present at a conference, right? Because then the travel money, if it's already used, could not be used for research and travel. I think, Casey, the advice then is apply for the research and travel. And once you synthesize the data and you have an opportunity to present that work at a conference, you can apply separately for travel to present your work to peers in your discipline. That may be a better approach then.
Yeah, Casey, I've done work like this. I've traveled to archives, and sometimes there are hidden expenses if you want to get things copied, made into digital formats, things like that. But as someone who's reviewing these programs or applications, I would expect to see a research proposal for that kind of project. Like, why are you going to the archive? How is it going to be, the materials that you're going to access be used in your thesis, et cetera. So it makes sense to me that you would have a proposal. I wonder if there is something along the lines of a difference between like research and travel versus just conference funding. Because when we say travel funding, we really just mean that separate category. We really do just mean conference or conference-like funding, don't we?
It's a great comment. Perhaps we should put conference in parentheses next to travel, at least in the website, right? To make that delineation where the money for travel is to present a prior conducted research and share it with the community, right? And I think that's a great point. And I'll make that adjustment in the website so people know that when they're applying for travel, it's primarily to present a work that for which research or creative activity has been done prior to. And that's a great point, Dr. Zubel.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes I think it can be a little bit hard to delineate, but in particular, when applying for only travel funds, we would expect that your research or creative activity has already been completed and you are engaging in dissemination of those activities to a conference or a meeting. And so if you are traveling to conduct your research, regardless if there are, if that, accessing the archive is free, we would want to see a research proposal with an activity like that.
Okay, and just one other quick question as far as that research proposal. I am doing this for my thesis and I've already written the proposal for that. Am I able to use that proposal in this with like the other information I needed to add, or does that count as plagiarism?
That's a great question. So I, again, and Dr. Zubel, please jump in here. We would expect to see kind of a pared down proposal, not your full thesis proposal. So we would want you to kind of go over the purpose, kind of the research questions or knowledge gap that you're feeling, your hypotheses, how you're going to conduct your research, but in a much more abbreviated form than your full thesis proposal.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good. And Casey, I understand what it's like to have worked on this kind of language for such a long time. If you find you have very similar sentences in certain parts of the proposal, that's not the plagiarism that we're talking about. That's more like self-cannibalism, let's say, kind of reworking your ideas, putting it in this other form. So really, when we talk about plagiarism, we're talking about taking someone else's ideas or taking ideas from something that you've already published, for example. I would consider both of these documents to be sort of in progress as you are working on them. But absolutely, if you just submitted the thesis proposal, we would feel like that wasn't doing a good job of speaking to the general audience, because presumably your thesis proposal is, really for your degree area. So think about that aspect of it as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Dr. Birch, there is a question from Shahrir bin Shahid, and it goes as follows. Is it required to submit conference registration copy for travel grants?
I would ask, what do you mean by conference registration copy? Do you mean your acceptance, or I'm not sure what that means.
Shahrir, would you provide clarity? Is the conference registration, is it mere submission of an abstract or acceptance of an abstract? That's the question Dr. Birch would like to know. Well, while we are waiting, there is another question from Emily. Emily, so I'll read this. Is it possible to use the travel grant to travel to a conference this year as professional development and then use the same grant to return to the conference the following year to present results?
That's a really great question. So you can apply for up to 2 travel grants. I would encourage you to submit 2 different ones for that kind of activity, if that makes sense, where you are traveling to a professional development component this year and then traveling to present in the following year.
Sure. Shahrir, are you here with us? We'd like to get feedback from you regarding your question, but meanwhile, there is. It's separate than acceptance or abstract. Abstract would be different. So Shahrir, are you talking about conference registration fees that you submit and you would like reimbursement later? Yes. Okay. So typically these are the student pays for the registration, or the department pays, right, Dr. Birch? And then when it comes for reimbursement after attending the travel, flight, hotel, registration fees are submitted to the graduate school. Am I correct?
Yes, that's where you work with the office associate or your administrative assistant. And there's some accounting things that are beyond the scope of my understanding, right? Where there's inter-accounts, and the departmental index can then reimburse the graduate school, the graduate school can reimburse the departmental index, and so forth. But that's where you really do want to work with your office associate or administrative assistant.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Birch. There are a few questions. There's a question from Lindsay. Are there any recommendations for locating additional funding? We are traveling to a conference that will cost more than $1,000 to attend. Are there opportunities from department and colleges to supplement the money given by the graduate school? Dr. Birch, Dr. Zubel?
So I would say that is department and college specific. There are also, I'm sure, I'm thinking of specifically with conferences that I attend, there are sometimes reduced costs for students. And sometimes in particular with some of the big conferences that my students attend, there are opportunities to volunteer to defray costs as well at the conference. So I encourage you to look at the professional activity, look at that professional meeting, and see if there are any other opportunities there. But any funds that are allotted by departments or colleges could be college or department specific.
And Emily, I think it was Lindsay, occasionally when funds are remaining, we have supported $100 extra or a $200 extra. So we don't want to burden the student for expenses over $1,000. So that is something the graduate school will be open to, subject to availability of funds. We don't know at this time how many proposals we will get for the fall and in the spring. But if there are some expenses slightly above 1,000, we would certainly be willing to reduce the burden on a graduate student. So please do contact the graduate school in such instances. But the point Dr. Birch was trying to make is reach out to your professor, reach out to the college, reach out to the dean, reach out to the conferences. They might have some opportunities as well for supporting graduate students for travel funds. And if all of these fail, please do reach out to us as well. We will try our best to support so you do not have to pay personally to go for a professional conference.
We do have
That's
another
helpful. Thank
question.
you.
So we do have another question in the chat, and this one is Garrett. He says, if the proposed budget and the actual amount used differ, is there a process for balancing the checkbook? Do we give back the remaining funding, or can we put that money towards other parts of the research and travel? So Garrett, this is where kind of you work with your office associate and or administrative assistant. So you don't personally get the funds that you would then have to pay back. Typically, funds are expended through a department's procurement card or through inter-account activities. So there's very little tangible funding that you have. Now, this could be different if indeed you are paying cash for participants, and then you would want to keep accounting of how much cash is being allotted to participants. And then if there are funds left over, it would then have to go back to accounts payable. And if there are additional research or budget line items that you may need, that is where you would probably want to contact the graduate school to see if you would need to put in a different budget request, or to ask if you can, allot X number of dollars to a different line item as necessary. So it's not typically the case that you're provided, $2,000 or $1,000 to spend. It's typically that spending occurs through the department's procurement card and inter-accounts.
Thank you for the clarification, Dr. Birch. Shafir, Emily, and Lindsay, I'm hoping that your questions have been answered. There's one question before I come to Birhanu. It comes from Warda. How long does it take to know the decision for application of a grant? And let's say October 11th, Dr. Birch, is the deadline. Could you just say what may be the timeline when the students can access the funds? And we'll then go to Birhanu.
So I know that we typically, once we have access to the applications, once they're put into the file, it can take the committee a week to two, depending on how many applications are received, to then review and make recommendations. And then the funding is often voted on at the following graduate council meeting. And so I would say that you would have a decision on funding by the next graduate council meeting. So if the applications are due October 11th, you would know by the November graduate council meeting or closely thereafter.
And then it's about 2 weeks, around 2 weeks for processing. But by then, if a department has money, we will honor the inter-account because a decision has been made.
Mm-hmm.
Birhanu, you have raised your hands. We would love to hear from you, your question or comments. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Koudali. my question is, as an international student, if a student is interested to conduct the research with a WKU professor, mostly on campus, but the housing is usually what's a problem for us international students, and it may not require as much travel, but is that this fund has a way to provide on-campus housing for the summer, for instance, and use the funds that way while conducting that research?
So thank you for the question, Birhanu. The way this fund is structured, it is for the intellectual development of a student primarily. So the focus is on a research or creative activity or creative scholarship and dissemination of that at a local, regional, national, or international conference. So that is the purpose of this grant. So it does not allow for local accommodations in the summer.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other, I'll just look at the chat, but if any of the students have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and raise your hand, and we'll strive to take questions. I'll look at the Zoom chat just to be sure that we have not missed any questions inadvertently. We're trying to keep track of multiple screens. Dr. Zubel, Dr. Birch, I believe that we have addressed all questions, at least in the chat feature.
I just wanted to clarify, because we were talking about it needing to go through the graduate council meeting. The
Sure.
next graduate council meeting after the October application deadline is, I believe, November 13th. So you would not hear for just probably a little over a month from the date that you submitted to ultimate approval.
Do we have any other questions from the faculty or students? And I did not notice Ms. Renee Purdy. She is the business manager, budgets and resources manager in the graduate school. She's a great contact to be in touch with, anything accounting, etc. Ms. Renee Purdy does a fabulous job. Ms. Purdy, anything to add for the good of the group regarding the budgeting aspects, timeline, etc., that you provide high quality service?
No, it all sounds like it was pretty much all covered.
Well, thank you. And so Ms. Renee Purdy, RENEE, period PURDY at wku.edu, has a wealth of experience regarding accounting, timeline, any questions regarding allowable expenses, non-allowable, and it's a good, I would suggest it's a good idea to note her email as well, in addition to your office associates and business managers in your departments and colleges. I know we are nearing 15 minutes to 5. Are there any other lingering questions or comments that you may have for us? Well, it looks like there are none, so please join me in giving a big shout out to Dr. Katrina Birch and also to Dr. Marla Zubel. The graduate school is truly grateful to both of them, and to Dr. Lily Juhadar, the other faculty member of the Graduate Council Research Committee. They review the proposals and provide recommendations to the Graduate Council, and the graduate school acts upon the recommendation. Dr. Birch, Dr. Zubel, we are truly indebted to both of you, and to Dr. Juhadar, and for your service to graduate students and for helping us with this graduate student research grant workshop. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dolly. And thank you, everybody, for